Earlier today, the Social Security trustees have just released their annual report on their system finances. Now, the news is awful. Most people know that the system's future benefit promises are greater than its future payroll tax, also known as the FICA revenues. But how big is the difference? And its fiscal gap, also called its unfunded liability. The answer is it's a terrifying $59.8 trillion, and it's buried deep in the appendix table, BIF1. That's over 2.5. That's over 2.5 times the size of the U.S. economy. Even more disturbing is the change since last year's report. The system's debt grew by $6.8 million, or $6.8 trillion. In other words, Social Security ran a deficit equal to 30% of the GDP. This is more than twice last year's $3.1 trillion official deficit. But unlike the change in the official debt, Social Security's deficits are carefully kept off the books for political reasons and not economic ones. Consequently, not a single media outlet that we know of has reported these numbers at all. The cause of Social Security's massive increase is in red ink. It's not policy. Nothing's changed there. Instead, it's the less favorable long-run economic and demographic projections. The source of Social Security's deficit doesn't make it any easier to handle. The current Social Security payroll tax is 12.4%, which is levied up from the maximum taxable earnings, now $142,800. Find it if you can. Table VIF1 says we need a 4.6 percentage point They want a 4.6 percentage point permanent increase in this rate, raising the Social Security FICA payroll tax to 17% to pay Social Security benefits on an ongoing basis. Now, going back to the 2011 Social Security Trustees report, and you'll find in table IBB6 that the system needed a 3.6 permanent percentage point tax hike to keep paying benefits through that time. Hence, by this measure, Social Security's highly troubled finances have deteriorated by an additional 28% in just 10 years. Unfortunately, Social Security's fiscal shortfall is just part of our nation's long-term insolvency. The official debt is now 100% of GDP. In 2007, it was 35%. Then there's our out-of-control federal health care spending. The Congressional Budget Office (CBO) estimates that Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, and other federal health care outlays will rise from 5.7% of GDP to 9.4% of the GDP over the next 30 years. And paying for just the Medicare part of this problem requires raising our current combined Social Security and Medicare 15.3% of the FICA tax to 22.4% today. Yes, half of the FICA is our FICA, whatever you want to call it, is the employer's share. Our bosses are lowering our net pay to cover what they need to send Uncle Sam on our behalf, except for the politically driven bookkeeping workers. The workers pay the entire FICA tax. One can look at our fiscal debacle program by program, but what really matters is the overall picture here. Fortunately, CBO's long-term fiscal projections can be used to assess the Uncle Sam's overall fiscal gap. The present value of our projected federal outlays, including interest payments and an official debt, basically less the present value of the projected federal receipts, and hold your fucking breath, the U.S. fiscal gap exceeds 10 years of the GDP growth. The figure is based on the government's preferred but quite low interest rate for forming the present values, and with the higher and arguably more appropriate rate, the U.S. fiscal gap is dramatically smaller, but so is the present value of the future tax base needed to cover the gap. And no matter what interest rate you use, the U.S. needs to immediately and permanently raise every federal tax by at least 1/3 to pay through time for what our government plans to spend on. The alternative here is massive spending cuts, and no, the Federal Reserve can't make this problem go away anytime soon by printing the money needed by the Treasury, and this would end where it always does: hyperinflation. The size of the overall U.S. fiscal gap is unknown to Americans because neither political party wants to officially calculate it, but other countries routinely measure their fiscal gaps. Indeed, the European Union does so every 3 years in an extensive study of the long-term fiscal sustainability, but none of the major European countries has anything close to the sustainability problem that we face. Herb Stein, who was President Nixon's chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, famously had said, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop eventually. But when it comes to America's fiscal affairs, what can't go on forever will stop too late, leaving our kids paying dramatically more in taxes and receiving dramatically less in their benefits. And this is fiscal child abuse. This is fiscal child abuse, pure and fucking simple. Most people think that our country is divided left and right, but what conflict is being hyped by politicians to hide the real war and the fiscal war that they, with their adult consent, are waging and winning against our children. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.